Okay, I let you know that I'd be telling you some stuff about the Glorious Revolution. The other section that you guys are reading is on the Enlightenment, and I'm going to be doing a PowerPoint in class next week on that, so I'll get you some more information about that. However, for the reading quiz on Monday, you need to make sure you read the section on the Glorious Revolution and take some notes on it so you have it for your reading quiz available. And here we go. I'll go through some things here. These are different types of notes, and what I've been doing in class. This is what I like to call key points notes. So if these notes work for you, I'll kind of explain how they work, and you can use them if you want for later notes that you do on your own, or you can kind of change. They're pretty easy to change from the outline that I give you in class into these kind of notes because they're similar to the outline but slightly different, as you'll see. Okay, so I just added in that the page that the section begins on is 175. And the section preview tells us that during the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution, nobles and wealthy commoners established a principle of representative government. There's some events like Elizabeth I dying, Civil War begins in England, 1642. Charles I is executed, 1649, and 1688 is the date of the Glorious Revolution. This is standard 10.2 stuff, so make sure that you're putting 10.2 under your page number where you're putting your notes, which should be right next to the page that you have your process questions on the Glorious Revolution. I believe that's page 18. So these notes you can have on 19 if you don't already have notes there. So background to the revolution is the first section. There were three great revolutions. Oh, and by the way, a quick little thing. If I'm going too fast for you and you're trying to jot this stuff down and I'm moving through it too quickly, you can push the pause button. Just a little hint there for you. You probably knew that, but just making sure. The three great revolutions of the 17th and 18th centuries, that would be the 1600s and the 1700s, were the Glorious Revolution, the American Revolution, and the French Revolution. This section, of course, focuses on the Glorious Revolution, which challenged long-held ideas of monarchical government. What the heck is that word, monarchical? Well, monarchical refers to kings. A monarch is a king who usually has absolute or limited rule over a country, state, actually, government. Um, Now, this would be the Roman numeral 1 usually, background to revolution, and this is kind of a little summary that I did of that, so that would be the summary that would have gone after the Roman numeral 1. Then I get into these would be like numbers in essence, defining some terms like divine right of kings is a term to define, as you'll see it on page 176 where it's highlighted and bolded there for you. So divine right of kings was established as it was believed that God had bestowed the power to rule on the king. So going against the king was in essence going against God. And if you're going against God in a heavily Christian background, Europe and England, it's the worst thing possible to do. I mean, there's nothing worse than that, and you'd be immediately executed for doing that type of thing, going against the king, going against the God. Other kings in Europe, like King Louis the 14th, that's a 14, was an absolute monarch. And when you have an absolute monarch, that's just about like a dictator. They're the ones making all the final decisions for the entire government of the country. And he said, I am the state. State is, of course, a term which means the government of a country. So he alone was the entire government. Kings in England, or monarchs I should say in England, because we have Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth I of England, they both determined that having the rich and powerful upper class on their side, the parliament, was a powerful advantage because they had a lot of money. And if you were a king who was ruling absolutely, but you didn't have the support of the guys with money, you weren't going to do too good as far as in world affairs or establishing more and more power for your state. So he decided, King Henry VIII was the first one, that Parliament and the monarch should work together and rule together. So some power was given to Parliament to make and give laws for the people of England. king had to check off on it, though. Eventually, the parliamentary system would replace the monarch's rule, but that took some revolutions before we got to that point. If you look on page 177, you'll see the blue section, how the Tudors ruled. And that would be like a letter A type thing. So I indent it once. Over here, background, which would have been a Roman numeral 1, I didn't indent. But down here where I put a little dash, it says how the Tudors ruled. I'm giving a one indentation. The sections here where I do two indentations, these are like little facts. These would be like the numbers, the regular numbers, not the Roman numerals. So this would be like a 1, a 2, a 3, and so forth. And then this would be an A, and then that would be a, this would be an A, and this would be a 1 underneath the A, that would be a 2, and so forth. So you see how it kind of relates to the outline. However, you don't have to keep track of all the Roman numeral 1s and A's and B's and 2's and 3's and all that kind of stuff. So how the Tudors ruled: there was this age-old rivalry between church and state that was finally solved in England when Henry VIII became the head of the church. He decides that, I don't want to listen to the Pope anymore. The Pope isn't going to have any power over me. So he, in essence, took the Catholic Church's holdings, and to get more favor with Parliament, gave away a lot of the church's lands to parliamentarian leaders, and was able to become head of the church. And that was usually a title reserved for the Pope prior to Henry VIII doing this. This was a very controversial decision. And later rulers like his daughter Mary would try to change England back to Catholicism. His daughter, I guess, didn't want to do what he did. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Henry began what's called the Anglican Church, the Church of England, but another word for it is Anglican Church. And he was, in essence, the Pope of the Anglican Church, but instead of calling him Pope Henry, they would just refer to him as the King, because he was also the King of England. Now, Mary, his daughter, was heavily influenced by her mother, who was Queen Catherine of Spain. See, Queen Catherine was married off to King Henry to try to resolve relations between the English and the Spanish, because they had gone to war a few times, and the Pope said, hey, I don't want you two countries that are Catholic going to war. So Henry was told, in essence, to marry Catherine. Well, Henry liked other women, and when he wanted to marry a new wife, because Catherine hadn't produced any male heirs, he found this one woman, Anne, and to get rid of Catherine, he'd have to break away from the church, because the Pope didn't want him to get a divorce. So that's why he forms the Anglican Church. Mary is queen for a little while, and she switches the Church of England back to Catholicism, and in doing that, she kills off a lot of the Anglican leaders in England. So they usually refer to Mary by a different name in England, because a lot of people were killed. They call her Bloody Mary. Elizabeth was the sister of Mary, but she was the daughter of Anne instead of the daughter of Catherine. And Henry VIII didn't have, even though he had several wives that he had children with, he didn't have any male heirs that survived. His male heirs died either at childbirth or when they were very young. So Elizabeth took over after Mary, and she was good with the Anglican way, and she reverted the Church of England back to the Anglican system. And the Parliament was on her side again, not fearful of what Mary had done. However, many members of Parliament were what's called Puritans, one of the terms that's in your book. And these Puritans wanted to purify the Anglican Church. Because one thing that Henry and Elizabeth did is the Anglican Church was almost an exact copy of the Catholic Church. If you went into Anglican ceremonies, it would be the same ceremonies if you went into a Catholic ceremony. So the Puritans said, this isn't too different from Catholicism, so we need to purify the church and make it a wholly new church that's better and not like the Catholics. Well, this led to eventually pilgrims leaving England when Elizabeth said, no, you can't do that, as she was head of the church. And they wanted to have their religious freedom, so they leave England for the Netherlands area, for Amsterdam, the Dutch, and then eventually to the United States. So later in the United States, the New World at the time, colonies of England in America. After Elizabeth dies, she has no male heirs, so a new line of leadership takes over England called the Stuarts. They're brought up in the book too, so that's another section if you're doing an outline. Stuart kings did not understand the relationship that the Tudors, Elizabeth, Mary, and Henry were all part of the Tudor family, had with Parliament. See, the Stuarts, these guys, James and Charles, they wanted to use that divine right thing again, and they wanted to absolutely rule England, kind of what Louis XIV had said, I am the state. So James and Charles, they pretty much disrespect and disregard everything Parliament is doing. In fact, Charles completely abolishes the Parliament. He gets rid of it for about 11 years, and they're locked out of their chamber and can't do anything. This obviously causes a problem in England between the parliamentarians, the people who want a parliament, and the people who are on the side of the king. So that leads to a civil war. Supporters of the king and supporters of parliament go to war with one another. Big fight ensues. Oliver Cromwell was the leader of the parliamentarian forces, military designer for it, and he is successful. He defeats the king's forces and is able to take power after the war is ended. He is kind of fearful of Charles coming back to power after he is taken over, so he puts Charles to death. After they chop off his head, Cromwell picks it up, shows it to the people, his blood is streaming down from it, and says, "This is a traitor." So, Cromwell starts a new government, a Puritan Commonwealth, because he's a Puritan Protestant, not an Anglican Protestant. And Cromwell starts something very different for England, a government that doesn't have a king for the first time. It was a dictatorship where Cromwell dictated, had all the power of the government. He was heavily Puritan, so he wanted to purify the church, and he was very heavily a military commander. Commonwealth, in case you don't know, is very similar to a republic where you have representatives, as Cromwell was a parliamentarian. So it is kind of odd that he starts this representative government, but he is also a military dictator, kind of dictating all the terms of what this new representative body is doing. When Cromwell dies, the Restoration begins. And the Restoration puts a Stuart back on the throne. However, this is still a bit concerning to the parliamentarians because the Scottish Stuart family is very heavily Catholic. The Scots are very, their culture is very, very driven by Catholicism up in the northern part of the British Isle. And Parliament didn't want another heavy Catholic person like a Bloody Mary back on the throne because they were afraid that Parliament might start getting killed off by a Catholic monarch. So Parliament tries to block the new next leader under the first Stuart king, the son of Charles II, a guy by the name of James II. And when they do this, Charles gets upset and dismisses the Parliament. A fight ensues between Parliament and the king once again. Parliament wins this pretty bloodless fight, and that's called the Glorious Revolution. Not a lot of armies clash, people don't shoot each other and all that kind of stuff. Instead, they threaten Charles, and he pretty much runs. Parliament would end up with most of the power when they take over, and they install a new king, a guy by the name of William of Orange. He's a Dutch person, and the Dutch were very Protestant, and he's married off to James's daughter, who had converted to Protestantism, so she wasn't a Catholic like her father. Glorious Revolution is bloodless there, as I said, and Parliament was able to overthrow a king and appoint a new king and queen, which is the first time in history they had done that. Some philosophers come about, like this guy John Locke is mentioned, and he pretty much does what he does because of all this craziness going on in the 17th century between Parliament and the monarch of England, with the going back and forth between Protestantation, Anglican, and Catholicism, the different changing religions of the state. He wants to come up with a way to try to solve those issues, and he writes a book called The Two Treatises on Government. A treatise is kind of like a big idea, so two big ideas on government. And in that, he outlines some very important ideas, like this idea of natural rights, that all people have the right to life, liberty, and property ownership. So without the Glorious Revolution, the seeds of the beginning of the United States, because later leaders who would eventually write things like the Declaration of Independence for the American colonies, used those same words of John Locke, of life, liberty, and happiness. The pursuit of happiness was changed from property ownership. I guess you can only be happy if you own property, right? So Thomas Jefferson wrote those words, and it was pretty much almost a direct plagiarism of good old John Locke that came out of the Glorious Revolution. So there you go. Any questions, you can email me or text me as well. And make sure you get the information into your notes. You can take all this information, part of this information, take notes in a different way. Remember, for this next reading quiz, it's going to be focusing on the people, more so of the people, events, and ideas. So it'll probably be about 7 questions looking at the various different rulers that I brought up in here. All these Stuarts and Tudors and Cromwell and so forth. There's also people who are brought up in the next reading in the Enlightenment, mostly philosophers. So be aware of those. Is about 7, maybe 8 questions will be focusing on the people and what they did. The other 2 will probably be some events or ideas. 2 or 3 questions. Have a good one.